Welcome to the Workers' Compensation Forum. I'm Tony Seaton, and I'm a practicing attorney in the East Tennessee region. Today, we're going to answer your questions about workers' compensation in Tennessee. With me today, I have a special guest, Ms. Lynn Becker. Thanks for being with me today, Lynn.
And thanks for having me. Tony, I feel like a lot of folks in our viewing audience don't really understand what workers' compensation is and how it can work for them. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
That's a good question, Lynn. Workers' compensation is a no-fault program, which basically means it doesn't matter who's at fault for a work-related injury or illness. It doesn't matter if your employer is negligent, and it doesn't matter if you trip on your own shoestrings. But once you've had a work-related injury or illness, workers' compensation provides for three things. One, it provides for medical benefits. Medical benefits not only now, but for the rest of your life as it pertains to that accident or that injury. Two, it provides for temporary benefits. That's money to live on while you're trying to recuperate or until you get back to work. And three, it provides for permanent disability benefits. Those are benefits that you get if you've had any type of a permanent restriction or permanent impairment.
Tony, what type of injuries or even illnesses might be covered by workers' compensation?
Obviously, workers' compensation is going to cover a single accident, say where someone is picking something up and has a back injury or something falls out of the ceiling and they get hit. But what a lot of people don't know is that workers' compensation also covers other types of injuries and illnesses. For instance, there may be a traumatic type of injury that happens over and over again, a repetitive, what we call a repetitive injury. You've often heard of people who have repetitive work injuries called carpal tunnel from working on keyboards or doing repetitive things. Other type of things are such as occupational illnesses where people are exposed to poisons and chemicals. Oftentimes that will cause someone to have a long-term effect and they'll have a workers' compensation claim.
What about, for example, someone who's had a back injury? Maybe they've already had surgery, but suddenly the condition is aggravated again. What happens?
We call that in legalese an aggravation of a pre-existing condition. And yes, that will be covered under workers' comp. Sometimes we will have people who've had a back injury, who've had surgery, who've had 10 years that has passed before they re-injure that back again. But yes, that is covered under workers' compensation.
So clearly workers' compensation works for injuries that happen on the job or job site and you see the injury or result immediately. But I think it's also important to remember that it covers gradual injuries as well. Injuries that happen over a period of time, maybe even years, where, for example, a worker might be unloading boxes all day or working on an assembly line, correct?
That's exactly right. And actually that happens quite often. You'll find a man who's been on an assembly line for, say, 23 years lifting boxes. There's no single accident, no traumatic event, no catch in his back. But all of a sudden he wakes up one day and he cannot move. Now, the question is that a work-related condition? Well, absent any other type of event, that has got to be connected to the workplace.
Okay, Tony, let's say I file a workers' compensation claim. How does my employer know that my injury occurred on the job or in another place?
Well, Lynn, sometimes it's hard to tell. The first thing that a worker should do is to give notice to their employer that they've been hurt at work. And it's usually best to give notice in writing in some shape, form, or fashion, whether it's getting a copy of an accident report or actually writing the accident report themselves. Secondly, you should get medical treatment after you've been authorized to go see a doctor. So oftentimes that will tell the tale, the accident report, and what you've told the doctor.
Now, you mentioned getting permission to go see a doctor. What happens if my company or employer doesn't want to give me that permission to seek a physician's care? What are my options then?
By law, the employer has to give you a list of 3 doctors. If the employer doesn't give you that list, we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can enforce that law.
Okay, then let's say I'm injured. Can you explain to me exactly what kind of medical care I'm entitled to?
You're actually entitled to a list of 3 doctors, not associated together in the same practice. Secondly, you're entitled to reasonable medical care as well as reasonable medical supplies and prescriptions. Of course, the problem comes up as to who determines what is going to be reasonable. And thirdly, which I think is most important, you're entitled to medical care and treatment for the rest of your life as it pertains to that injury or illness.
So while my claim is actually being processed and I'm out of work and I'm still healing from my injury, what kind of benefits am I going to get in the meantime?
These are what are called temporary benefits. Temporary benefits are 2/3 of your pay averaged over the past year. You get the 2/3 of the pay while you're out of work and until you either go back to work or until a doctor says that you've gotten as good as you're going to get and you're not going to get any better or not going to get any worse. And you got to be off 7 straight days before you get temporary benefits.
So let me get this straight, Tony. I'm injured on the job, and that injury prevents me from immediately returning back to work. You're saying I have to be off work for 7 consecutive days before I receive temporary work benefits.
That's right. You've got to be off work to get temporary pay. If you continue to work during your accident or during the recuperation of your accident, you won't get temporary pay. And again, you've got to be off 7 straight days. Then you'll start receiving 2/3 of your pay until you return to work or until the doctor says you've gotten as good as you're going to get.
Some workers may not be able to make it on only 2/3 of their salary, feeding, for example, a family of 4. What other areas of opportunity or aid are there for them? For example, food stamps, Social Security benefits, unemployment benefits. What are their options?
It can be tough on those families. Sometimes they have to go out and apply for unemployment benefits. But really, that's not a good idea because you've got to say that you're ready, willing, and able to work to apply for unemployment, and sometimes that contradicts the fact that you're disabled under workers' compensation. But oftentimes lawyers can help you find other avenues of financial benefits. For instance, food stamps. A lot of people have to get food stamps although they've never had them before. Social Security disability benefits is another source of income, while you're recuperating or while you're out on a workers' compensation claim.
Right now we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll take a look at what medical care and treatment you're entitled to for your workers' compensation claim. Workers' compensation provides 1. Medical care now and in the future. 2. Temporary pay while you recover from your injury. And 3. Benefits for any permanent injuries.
Well, I wouldn't recommend trying to handle a workman's comp claim on your own by yourself. You do need a professional, and Tony Seaton is the man to see. He stood up for me, he fought for me, and I was glad he was there because the people that we were dealing with were from a larger city, and their lawyer was one of the big city dudes. And he come up here thinking he was going to ride roughshod over Tony, and it didn't happen. Tony stood his ground, he stood up for me, he fought for me, and got what I was satisfied with.
I suffered an injury on the job, and I was off from work over a year. The insurance company for workman's compensation treated me fairly, but it was a permanent injury, and I didn't have a job to go back to. And I knew I needed help with my future. I was not able to work. That's when I consulted Tony Seaton. He was able to answer all my questions, get me on the right track, and work with the insurance company and me and the employer so that there were good results. And I have been compensated for my injury. If you're having trouble with your workman's compensation claim, I recommend that you see a competent attorney. I had very good results with my claim with Tony Seaton.
Have you been injured on the job? I'm Tony Seaton, and for over 20 years I've been helping injured workers in Tennessee with workers' compensation laws. Understanding these complicated laws is your key to receiving fair treatment. There's no fee unless you win your claim, and there's no charge to talk to me. So if you have questions about workers' compensation, call me. The phone call is free.
Call the law offices of Tony Seaton at 1-800-282-1021. That's 1-800-282-1021.